Okay, my name is Linda Lewis, and I am the American Friends Service Committee Country Director for North Korea. My job is running the North Korean program, an agricultural assistance program that AFSC has on the ground. Most people are surprised to hear that actually Americans have programs on the ground in North Korea, but as a Quaker organization, we've been investing for peace on the Korean Peninsula for about as long as the U.S. government has invested in war. We started right after the war ended in 1953 with an armistice, so the war's not over. There's never been a time when U.S. soldiers haven't been there. Also in 1953, the U.S. put sanctions on North Korea, so there's never been a time when there haven't been economic warfare going on by the U.S. government then. In 1980, we started working in North Korea, and AFSC did people-to-people exchanges, and we were the first public service organization to actually go there. In 1996, we started an agricultural development program addressing the issue of food security, which we think is the key humanitarian need, and we've been doing that for 20 years, and I've been running the program now for about 7 years.
So my name is Daniel Jasper. I'm the Public Education and Advocacy Coordinator for the American Friends Service Committee. So I suppose I would be the newest component to this program. My job is to sort of bring home the lessons that we're learning in the field to policymakers in DC. So I spend a lot of time talking with State Department officials, people on the Hill, about what we're seeing and about opportunities that we might identify on the ground. It's usually in the people-to-people and humanitarian realms, things that can improve U.S.-DPRK relations.
I was there in November. As an American organization, we have our office in China, sort of about as close as you can get without being in North Korea, but American organizations aren't allowed to actually be present in North Korea, so we work outside from China, and it's easier to ship farm materials in from there. It's easier. We bring a lot of groups outside to China for training, agriculture training of various kinds. So I was there in November. We usually go twice a year. It was a routine visit. That said, I would say that recent sanctions have perhaps done more to hinder humanitarian assistance work than they have to actually cause any problems inside North Korea. You really wouldn't know it was a tense situation outside. We ask North Koreans, we say, how are the sanctions affecting you? And what they say is, well, how would we know since we have never lived in a situation where we weren't being sanctioned?
I had the occasion to go to the Olympics, and so I got sort of a feel for how the South Koreans are handling the situation right now. And normally, I think that this kind of stuff, it sort of washes past them. Tensions rise and fall, and they're just sort of used to it. But I think now, that there is this new component, and that is the U.S. president is a little bit unpredictable, and I think that has some people on edge. But despite this, the Olympics, I think, really were sort of a heartening moment. There was a lot of, I think, a hope for the future, and I think you could kind of see that start to rise in that moment. I think that there was probably a difference within certain political spectrums of the South Korean public about how they felt about the Olympics, but in general, I think you could sort of see a turning point and a lot of hope arise from that.
There's reality and there's politics. There's a political narrative and there's reality of the situation. How clearly do you think politicians actually see, what's real and what's hype?
That's a good question. It's difficult to say. What I would say is that I think politicians on the Hill, members of Congress, I think have been almost willfully burying their heads in the sand about this issue. They haven't been speaking out. They've been really hesitant to take any meaningful stance on the issue, and that's because they don't feel any public pressure. I think for years we spoke to offices and they would say, well, we never hear from constituents on this issue, and so we don't really feel compelled to take a stand. And I think that's still sort of the case right now, and it's sort of a dangerous moment to bury your head in the sand And if, the fact that Congress is not holding the administration accountable for having a plan here, I think is really to the detriment of international security, really.
I think what's hopeful, as Dan noted, is the fact that both North and South Korea have stepped up. And in my mind, in the last year, we've seen the unthinkable. We've seen people actually talk about a second Korean War, which is amazing. It would be catastrophic. And to me, to hear American politicians say that the risk of catastrophic war is somehow safer than the risk of the cost of peace. I mean, when you hear people saying how terrible it is that North and South are talking to each other, you think, isn't this a little upside down? There was a North Korean who said to me, when I said, you seem pretty sanguine about no war, he said, North and South Korea both do not want a second Korean War. Do you really think that either one of us would be interested in destroying everything we've worked for the past 70 years? They're the ones who have who are going to be affected by it.
Over time, they all said the same word. They said that they noticed the sincerity of the American Friends Service Committee, that we were there and we were committed. And I think that that's really important, especially in this moment. We've heard a lot of, I think, analysts sort of saying that, oh, North Koreans can't be trusted, and there's this sort of a blanket discussion of how North Koreans are. But, in fact, what we see is that they're looking for that sincerity. They're looking for that dialogue, and just as any community would, they're just looking for some trust and some respect. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really important lesson that we try to bring home.
We operate in a pragmatic and respectful way. And given the long history of our continued presence there, we must be doing something right. We don't talk about differences. We talk about what we share, and what we share is the work. And when you start out, you find a common space to stand on and something you can agree on, and it may be just where to go for lunch. But then pretty soon you've expanded that space until you've learned how to answer each other's interests and understand each other's point of view to the fact that you can do more significant things together. So I guess if they've learned to persuade me, I've learned how to persuade them too. So.
Yeah, but you've established a trusting dialogue.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is important.
Well, when we talk to our Korean partners, we talk about the same things, and I go there with young Chinese staff too, female staff, and so we have a really good relationship. But we talk about the same things that you talk about with your friends in other places. The staff show pictures of their children running around on their iPhones, and everyone can see how their children are growing, and they show us pictures of their kids now too, running around. They know my husband, they know my son, who's grown, and always the first thing they say is, well, has he gotten married yet? They discuss maternity leave benefits in North Korea and maternity leave benefits in China, and which one are more useful. Now, of course, as an American, I can't contribute to that conversation, but so they have the same kinds of concerns too, about their families, about their jobs, about the local problems. So those are the kinds of conversations we have. So I would wish that their children, as the same as I wish for my son, can grow up in a world without fear and with enough food, and with a decent education and good shelter. And we talk about all those things.
All of Korea's exceptionalism, it's not an isolated incident. I mean, I think that we're having a lot of conversations in society about how we treat certain communities and about how we see those communities. We see this with the Black Lives Matter movement, we see it with the Me Too movement, and suddenly we find ourselves in a conversation about, are North Koreans trustworthy? Can we have dialogue with them? And in fact, this is the same conversations that we're having within our own country. And it's not an isolated thing. And in fact, if we back up, we take a step back and say, are North Koreans really that different? And in fact, what we see is the conversations that we have, they don't have horns growing out of their head. they are looking for sincerity, and they're able to have dialogue and engage. And in fact, we're able to persuade and have conversations and move each other forward. And so I'd really like to impress upon people that this is not an untenable situation. This is something that we can get past if we put our minds to it.
Yeah, and often the things that are said about North Korea don't put it in the proper context. It's an underdeveloped country. There are lots of places where 80% of the people don't have enough calories, not just North Korea. And toward those countries, and lots of places where children are malnourished. And we don't say it's the fault of their government. We show compassion toward them and wish that we could help with the situation. But somehow North Korea is an exception. We don't see that it's struggling with many of the same problems that we see all around the world. And why is our response different toward them, and why do we blame the government in a way we don't the government of India or Indonesia or the mayor of Los Angeles? I don't know. It's treated differently.
Certainly the American Friends Service Committee has a lot of resources on, I would say, steps that the U.S. could take to improve relations. We don't delve too much into the history, but we certainly have policy recommendations. We've reflected on our experience on the ground there. So that's a good place to start. I would say it's AFSC /engage NK is our sort of main site for that. Oh, you know, I would also recommend, there's a movie called The Haircut on YouTube. It's just a 20-minute video, and I think it really sort of, it'll change people's perspective of the country. There's a lot of narratives, erroneous narratives about the country. One of them being that you can only get certain hairstyles, certain haircuts in North Korea. And there were two Australians that set about sort of proving this wrong. And in fact, you can get any haircut you want in North Korea. And they prove that in the film. And I think they take you through the history and sort of a lot of the vilification and the way that the media portrays North Korea and how that damages the situation. So I would really recommend that film.
Cool. Anything else you'd like to say that you can think of off the top of your head?
UN agencies work in Pyongyang. They're resident. You know, the FAO, UNICEF, the UN Development Program, and that they do reports all the time. And you can go and find reports on the situation inside the country. It's not opaque. It's not as if the FAO doesn't give some kind of analysis of the crop production every year. So the UN is a good source for information.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I just as a sort of final thought, the one thing that I would really press upon people is that I think U.S. officials are really sort of failing Americans in a lot of ways that people aren't aware of. There's a number of humanitarian situations that exist that we see as perfect bridges to start improving relations. One of them being the fact that there's a few thousand Korean Americans that were divided from their family members in North Korea, and they're seeking to reunite with their family members. This to us seems like a perfect way to start restoring living links between our two countries and to start improving relations. We've seen North and South do similar things in the past. So we'd like the U.S. to start doing something like this as well. The other option too is the fact that after the war, about 5,000 U.S. service members were left in North Korea, and their remains are still in North Korea. But for a decade, the U.S. and North Korean militaries ran joint operations to find these remains and to repatriate them back to the U.S. And in 2005, the U.S. pulled out of that operation, which is really saddening because both militaries lauded it and saw it as a perfect way to maintain relationships and to reduce the room for error and miscalculation. And so restarting those operations would be a great way to, again, I would say, do justice to those service members and their families who are still searching for them, and improve relations. So it's sort of a twofer, if you will.
Nurture peace. What a concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. That's awesome. Wow.
Wow.
Good information.
Well, people forget that just like war, peace takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort, and it takes time. It takes investment. It takes strategy. It takes practice. It takes patience. And peace doesn't break out overnight, just like war doesn't. That you don't get there in one great leap. That you have to keep working at it. And there are a lot, as Dan says, of small things that we've identified that both sides would be interested in. What's the cost? What's the risk?
Yeah. Wow, that's great. That's good stuff.